Welcome to Writers Radio. I'm Ingrid Rose, your host for this episode, featuring The Last Wilderness by Carole Harmon, my co-host and co-producer. This is such an appropriate title, as this is the last program. Before you share excerpts from this manuscript, Carole, can you tell us a little bit about how this writing project came to be?
My grandfather died before I was born, so I never knew him. But I grew up with his photographs, which were all over the building that he built in Banff, which after the Second World War, my parents managed for many years, and which is still in our family. My mother and I would go downtown to have coffee with my dad, and we would walk into the store, and all over the walls and hanging from the ceiling would be these photographs. I just fell in love with them. So I grew up with them and didn't think too much about it until I was myself in a photography program at the Banff Center in the early 70s. And we were supposed to do a project on a historical photographer. I had been to Paris, and I chose Man Ray. My friend Edward, who was from out east in Canada, chose Byron Harmon. I was astonished. It hadn't occurred to me that he was important, that he was a historical figure in photography who merited attention. I ended up doing a very large project in the 70s where I kind of saved his negatives from rotting away in paper envelopes in a wooden filing cabinet in a storeroom, and placed his collection in the White Museum in Banff, did a book, printed an exhibition that traveled in the late 70s and then again in the mid 80s. And off and on since then, I have been doing projects with him. You know, I'll finish one and think I'm done, and time will pass. And then, for whatever reason, I'll pick it up again. When I took the writer's studio in Vancouver in 2016, one of the things that came up for me again was to do another book about my grandfather that didn't just show his photographs, but gave more of the history and his background. I've been working on it off and on since then, and I'm now, I think, finished and ready to try and send it out in the world in whatever form it goes out in.
So maybe we can hear the first, I think it's a poem.
Wolverine history. What is wild? Who is fit to survive? We think wild out of control. Wild never is. Wild balances. Knife edge. Rain squall. Snow. Thunder. Storm. Rolling on and on. Growing up in the small town of Banff in the Canadian Rockies, I thought I knew where wild was. Wild was the surrounding mountains and remote valleys of Banff National Park. It has taken me years to recognize my error. What is wild underlines my inquiry into the role my family played in the colonial history of Western North America, specifically the Pacific Northwest of the USA and the Canadian Rockies. It centers on my paternal grandfather, Byron Harmon, who photographed and filmed the Canadian Rockies and adjoining mountain ranges between 1906 and 1934. It delves into family history and introduces some of the remarkable characters with whom he shared a life in this mountain wilderness. I am proud of the accomplishments of my grandfather. He recorded a way of life which was passing away even as he first set foot in Banff. My personal concerns are also for the environment and the many degradations human activity has exacted on the Canadian wilderness over the past several hundred years. Colonialism and capitalism have levied a toll on the land, the Indigenous people who first lived here, and the country as a whole. Introducing Byron Harmon. My grandfather is 27 when he first arrives in Banff in 1903. As the story goes, he arrives by train. He's from Tacoma, Washington, where he has left his home, family, and photography business and set out to explore the USA and Canada as an itinerant tintype photographer. While relaxing in the warm mineral waters of the Cave and Basin pools near Banff town site, he meets Tom Wilson, a renowned outfitter and guide. Tom cajoles him to settle in Banff, where the opportunities for photographs are legion, but no photo studio yet exists. He has other commitments, but he returns to Banff in 1904. In 1905, he opens Byron Harmon Photos, a studio on Banff Avenue. By 1906, he is boasting the largest collection of Canadian Rockies photographs in existence. He marries and raises 3 children, the youngest of whom is my father, Don Harmon. He dies in 1942, 5 years before my birth. My image of him is composed entirely of accounts from other people and my lifelong visceral reaction to his photographs.
Thank you. So already we can hear poetry, prose. Tell me a little bit about how you've been putting this manuscript together.
Well, I could tell you the history of the different drafts, one of which almost got published but didn't. But what it has settled in at is a long series of poems titled Wolverine History, which really form the beginning of each chapter of the book. So Wolverine History begins the book and ends the book. And the rest of it is creative nonfiction. There's quite a lot of quoted material from other sources and my commentary that ties it all together.
There's a kind of backbone that speaks to your interest in ecology and protection of the wild. Yeah. And alongside there's the human history, right? Because your grandfather really represented a frontier.
Yes, he was documenting the landscape, but he was also documenting a way of life. He was documenting the people that were involved in that life. The more I looked at his collection, the more I could see that over time he had focused on different aspects of that story so that no one trip, no one expedition had the whole story. You have to kind of look at the different things he did, and collectively it comes up with this portrait of a place in its own time and the people that were involved with it.
Yes, and it seems to me that as a it is a history, but more and more it seems important for us to understand a place through its past in order to consider how we continue to preserve what's valuable in the present. Will you read us the next little piece?
So this is my account of one particular trip, the poem that starts the chapter that it falls in. Wolverine History. Leaving. You lope with swaying gait, slide snowshoe to Alpine Pass, raid cache of grizzly bear. You amble meadows to Alpine Lake, ptarmigan in winter camouflage, marmots denned among snow-shrouded rocks, easy prey. You bound up slope, lope continental divide, snow-blown meadows, glaciers, lakes. You hunt, scavenge, mark trees and rocks with malodorous musk. Wolverine prowls here. Expedition to Yellowhead Pass and Mount Robson, 1911. In 1911, a party of worthies from the mountaineering community in Canada and scientists from the Smithsonian Institute undertook one of the most glamorous expeditions into the Northern Rockies those old mountains had yet seen. A.O. Wheeler was the motivating and organizing force behind the expedition, under the auspices of the Alpine Club of Canada. The Rainbow Mountains refers to the group of peaks around Mount Robson, west of Jasper National Park. At 12,973 feet, 3,954 meters, Mount Robson is the highest peak in the Canadian Rockies and was the focus of much avid attention by climbers in the early years of the 20th century. This expedition has fascinated me for years because of its serious intentions but flamboyant nature. It was not an expedition into virgin territory. Viscount Milton and Dr. Cheadle traveled from Edmonton to Kamloops via Yellowhead Pass in 1862 and described Mount Robson and Tetuan Cache in their book, The Northwest Passage by Land, published in 1865. Yellowhead Pass was used by prospectors as a route west through the Rockies into the goldfields of northern BC. Hunting, trapping, and trading were common in this region in the late 19th century. But this region had never been surveyed, never been mapped, its peaks had never been climbed. Few had ventured into the wilderness around Mount Robson. Originally intended as a smaller group, endorsement and financial assistance from provincial and Dominion governments made it possible to enlarge the scope of the expedition. A scientific investigation of the fauna, flora, and geology was added to its goals. An attempt was made, without success, to interest Canadian scientists in the expedition. The matter was then submitted to Dr. Charles Walcott, Secretary of the Smithsonian Institute of Washington, D.C. Dr. Walcott had been a frequent summer visitor to the Canadian Rockies and an enthusiastic participant in Alpine Club of Canada activities. In 1909, he had discovered unique ancient fossil beds known as the Burgess Shale on Mount Burgess in Yoho National Park. The Smithsonian Museum of Natural History currently houses over 65,000 specimens collected from there. Walcott was eager to broaden the acquisitions of the Smithsonian. He sent his son Charlie and Harry H. Blayton as big game hunters as well as 2 curators from the United States National Museum, Ned Hollister and J.H. Riley, to collect under permit specimens of flora and fauna. The final group is an odd mixture of experienced mountaineers and scientists who are novices to the mountains. The Canadian group includes A.O. Wheeler, Dominion surveyor, Conrad Kane, guide, Byron Harmon, photographer, Reverend George Kinney, assistant to Mr. Wheeler, Donald Phillips, outfitter, his assistant, Jim Harvey, and Casey Jones, cook. In 1911, civilization was at the door. The Grand Trunk Pacific Railway, proposing to open up the northern section of the mountains in a manner similar to that done by the Canadian Pacific Railway to the south, had pushed west as far as Henry House near Jasper. They were keen to support Wheeler's plan, offering funds and transportation from Edmonton to the end of construction. In return, they consulted Wheeler on sites for future hotels, sending their top marketing people in a special car to confer with him en route. Wheeler's goals for this expedition are personal. He hopes, quote, to investigate the facilities for holding one of the Cubs' big camps close to the Great Monolith, and while doing so, to make topographical survey of such area as might fall within the scope of the expedition, using phototopographical methods as a basis of the work, end quote. He also wants to control the first ascents of mountains which have eluded capture for so long.
You did yourself a lot of mountaineering when you were young, I'm assuming with your father.
Well, I've always done quite a lot of hiking. I am not a mountain climber. I have climbed the occasional easy peak, but no, I never did take up climbing. And I did. I went out with both my aunt. My aunt kind of taught me hiking, but I went out with my dad on his own photographic, trips into the mountains when I was a teenager. And then I thought I would be off in the world doing other things, and somehow I ended up being pulled back to Banff and to photography and to my family's business. It wasn't what I originally set out to do, but it's what I ended up doing.
Yes, except it seems to me that now it's very much part, along with writing.
Yes.
Your art practice.
Yeah. It keeps expanding and finding other avenues to trap me with. Around the Rainbow Mountains. The party travels by train from Edmonton to the end of the line. Byron photographs railway construction before they head off into the wilderness. They will make a complete irregular circuit around Mount Robson, the first that has ever been made. Once they reach the route which will lead to the mountain, the horses are sent with their handlers around the range by another route, as they would not be able to handle the difficult terrain ahead. The survey party sets out on foot, carrying all gear and supplies on their backs, as they climb to the base of Mount Robson and venture forth on its great glaciers to explore, photograph, and survey. Wheeler will later write in the 1912 Canadian Alpine Journal, "As we topped the crest of Lynx Mountain, the whole wonderful panorama came into view. At our feet flowed the Robson Glacier. Across the wide river of ice, the great massif of Robson rising supreme above all other peaks. White against a sky of perfect blue, it seemed to belong to a world other than our own, ethereal, snowy, resplendent mountain, crowned with immense sculptured cornices, the splendid, sharp, conical peak of Whitehorn Mountain. It was a most stupendous alpine scene I had ever gazed upon setting the blood coursing through the veins as fast as a torrent, with the pure joy of being alive and there. Reverend Kinney's letter. The flavor of the trip is captured in a letter from George Kinney to J. Monroe Thorington, president of the American Alpine Club, written many years later on September 7, 1934. The letter was prompted by the untimely death of Conrad Kane, which stirred up old memories. It was shared with me by Dr. Thorington when I was researching my grandfather's films and photographs in the 1970s. Dr. J. Monroe Thorington, editor, American Alpine Journal, Philadelphia, USA. Dear Dr. Thorington, your kind letter was delayed because of a wrong address. I am grateful to you for putting me in touch with the facts of Guide Conrad Kane's death, although I had heard of it. There are many memories surging through my mind of incidents that happened during my many associations with that unique and courageous soul. I first met Conrad at the meets of the Canadian Alpine Club. Then, in 1911, as you know, he was official guide during our Mount Robson expedition. He and I and Byron Harmon had many things in common, and had each been especially promised by Mr. Wheeler as the main attraction to us that we should have a chance to climb Mount Robson. Conrad had his own reasons. Harmon wanted photographs, and I wanted pictures that I had failed to get on my climb. We often talked over and planned for that event. Conrad and Harmon, as you know, were choice spirits at a mountain camp, or on the trail, or on a climb. We have been associated together many times in previous years, and now our campfire gatherings and little parties rocked with mirth at the tales and capers of this lover of nature. We reached the Mount Robson region. As you know, we were making the first topographical survey of what are now Jasper Park and Mount Robson Park. We were locating for the first time hundreds of miles of the interprovincial boundary line between Alberta and British Columbia, and Wheeler got out the first official map of that region because of our work that season. In our party were two fine fellows from the city of Washington. Dr. Walcott's son was one. These two youths were our big game hunters for trophies for the Smithsonian Institute. They were good hunters, but unlucky, and Conrad and Curly Phillips would on occasion go out a little and shoo in a flock of goats or sheep or a few caribou in order that our specialists of the institution might have something of size to stuff. We were in camp near Berg Lake. Our climbers were having a day off from strenuous work and had been busy here and there when Harmon, who had been up the Robson Glacier after pictures, came rushing into camp, wildly shouting, "Bear! Bear!" Out tumbled the big game hunters, wildly scrambling after Harmon the guide. Conrad and Curly seized what weapons were handy, and I trailed behind, efficiently armed with two 10-inch .22s. We were making a comedy of what was a serious matter for the hunters. At last we discovered the black bear on the mountainside above us. The big game hunters knelt and began filling the mountainside with lead. Their magazines were soon emptied, and Conrad and I each got behind one of the hunters and pulled the shells out of their belts and handed them the ammunition as needed during the terrific bombardment. The bear, in the meantime, dodged here and there or else watched curiously what was going on. He was finally hit by a stray bullet and scurried out of sight. The chief incident I wanted to give you about Conrad was as follows. Conrad, Harmon, and I were now in serious doubt whether Wheeler intended to keep his pledges to us severally, re. the climbing of Mount Robson. When I asked Wheeler about it, He always sidetracked me with some imminent plan he had. We were greatly disappointed and even suggested some desperate plan, and then it happened. Conrad, under pretense of walking down the Emperor Falls Gorge alone, disappeared. He did not get home that night. In the early morning, he strolled into camp. He had captured Mount Whitehorn. Wheeler was wrathy, but could do nothing. He claimed that Conrad was crazy and that his climb could not be recognized. But later on, his cairn and records were found on the peak of Whitehorn, and Wheeler was robbed of the privilege of farming out the first climb to some ambitious climber later on. We were never given a chance at Mount Robson on that trip, and soon left that region. But often Conrad chuckled how he had evened up things a little against Wheeler. First ascent of Mount Resplendent, 1911. In a further act of defiance, Conrad and Byron slip away from camp and make the first ascent of Mount Resplendent, the beautiful horned twin of Mount Robson. The photographs taken that day capture the mountain in snow and cloud. Conrad cutting steps with his ice axe on an 80-degree slope, showing crevasses beneath and behind him on a rubbled glacier. A portrait of Conrad with his own and Byron's ice axes near the summit. Conrad ascending the ice cornice to the summit. These are underexposed images made in the most severe weather and dangerous circumstances. The first ascent of Mount Resplendent was one of Byron's most treasured experiences.
I'm really struck by the descriptions in these letters. These men were really good writers.
They were, yes.
Well, thank you. That was really quite the journey to go on with you.
Thank you.
Anything more you would like to say, given that this is our last opportunity on Writers Radio?
Oh, we all have mixed feelings about stopping. Each episode is so much work to produce that all other things get put aside, and a time comes when there has to be more balance. So we've really enjoyed doing it and intend to keep the podcasts of all of our episodes alive on the internet.
Yeah. Gary, could we get a word from you?
Well, yes, it's in a way sad to see the back of Writers Radio heading over the horizon. But in the 5 years that we've been working, I've certainly learned a lot, not only about radio production, but it's taking me into compositional places that I probably never would have gone. As a result, I've learned so much from this experience, and I fully intend to apply it to an album or two projects in the future. We wound up with somewhere in the neighborhood of, for each episode, around 1,200 people that would listen in, sometimes as much as 3,000. So many thanks to all of you that supported this. Watch this space. We'll see what happens next.
So you've been listening to Writers Radio. I've been the host, Ingrid Rose, for this last episode. We heard Carole Harmon reading from her manuscript, The Lost Wilderness. Thank you all for listening.
You have been listening to Writers Radio, a non-commercial collaborative project which presents talented writers reading their own work. These stories, essays, and conversations revisit the long tradition of oral storytelling that connects us to the inspiration behind the words. Be sure to check the website, writersradio.ca, to subscribe to our free notifications list. It's also a way of letting the writers know you are there and appreciating their creative work.
Writers Radio broadcasts from Half Moon Bay on the Sunshine Coast in Canada, traditional tribal land of the Sechelt Nation of the Coast Salish peoples. We express our gratitude for their wisdom teachings and land stewardship.